Caleb Vance was 38 years old, and 5 years ago he had been unstoppable. Star quarterback at Princeton, tech entrepreneur with a company valued at $50 million, engaged to the most beautiful woman in New Jersey. His life was a golden highway with no speed limits, until that rainy night in Maryland when everything changed. The crash happened in seconds. One moment he was driving home from a board meeting, the next his BMW was spinning through the guardrail like a child's toy. When he woke up in Johns Hopkins Hospital 3 days later, the doctor's words echoed in the sterile room. The spinal injury is severe. You may never walk again. Saffron had been there initially, holding his hand, whispering promises. We'll get through this, baby. Nothing changes between us. But as weeks turned to months, her visits grew shorter, her smiles thinner, her excuses more creative. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning when their infant daughter was crying in the next room. I can't do this anymore, Saffron had said, her Louis Vuitton suitcase already packed. I married a champion, not a charity case. She took nothing but her jewelry and left everything, including their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. Now, 5 years later, Caleb sat in his custom wheelchair in the grand ballroom of the Borgata, surrounded by his former classmates from Eastern Regional High School's class of 2005. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored. His silver watch caught the light, but none of that mattered to the vultures circling him tonight. They saw what Saffron wanted them to see. A broken man collecting disability checks, struggling to raise a child alone in some cramped apartment. They had no idea that the quiet man in the wheelchair had spent the last 5 years building something extraordinary in the shadows. As the dishwater dripped from his chin onto his lap, Caleb didn't flinch. He simply checked his watch, 11:47 p.m., and whispered 2 words that would change everything, right on time. In the back of the ballroom, a woman in a red halter dress gasped, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Former teammates shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their phones. But Saffron was just getting started. She grabbed the microphone from the DJ booth, her new husband Sterling watching from their VIP table with amusement. Everyone, please, she announced, her voice sickeningly sweet. Let's have a moment of silence for all the dreams that died in this wheelchair. The crowd murmured uncomfortably, but no one moved to help. No one except the team of federal agents who had just pulled into the parking lot, armed with arrest warrants that would turn this reunion into front-page news. Caleb remained perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on his ex-wife. Behind his calm exterior, 5 years of preparation were about to pay off. The broken man Saffron thought she was humiliating had quietly become the most dangerous person in the room. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting powerful. And Caleb Vance was about to show everyone exactly how powerful a man in a wheelchair could be. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The rain hammered against the windshield like bullets as Caleb navigated the winding roads outside Baltimore that October night 5 years ago. His phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. Another investor wanting to discuss the acquisition offer that could change everything. Apex Systems, his baby, was about to become a household name. Just get home safe, he muttered to himself, squinting through the downpour. Saffron was waiting at their penthouse in Princeton with Emma, probably rehearsing her acceptance speech for the charity gala next week. She loved those events, loved being seen on his arm, loved the whispers of tech royalty that followed them through every room. The deer appeared out of nowhere. Caleb yanked the wheel hard left, but physics had already taken control. The BMW spun like a coin toss, careened through the guardrail, and tumbled down the embankment in a symphony of crushing metal and shattering glass. The last thing he remembered was the taste of blood and the sound of his phone still buzzing somewhere in the wreckage. When consciousness returned 3 days later, the hospital room smelled like disinfectant and death. Saffron sat beside his bed, her makeup perfect despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. For a moment, hope flickered in his chest. "Baby," he whispered through cracked lips. "You're here." She squeezed his hand, but something felt different. Hollow. The doctors said you're going to be okay, she said, but her voice carried the weight of someone delivering bad news. Dr. Patterson entered with a clipboard and the kind of expression that ended dreams. Mr. Vance, we need to discuss your condition. The spinal cord injury was severe. While we've stabilized you, the likelihood of regaining function in your lower extremities is... He paused, searching for gentler words. Extremely limited. The room tilted. Caleb felt like he was falling all over again. But there's still hope, right? Saffron asked quickly. Physical therapy, experimental treatments? We have money. We can fix this. Dr. Patterson's silence was answer enough. That night, after the doctor left, Saffron sat in the chair beside his bed, staring at her phone. The charity gala was in 4 days. The tech conference in Silicon Valley was next month. Their entire social calendar, their entire life was built around his success, his mobility, his presence. What are people going to think? She whispered, not realizing he was awake. God, what am I supposed to tell them? How do I explain this? Not how will we manage or what do we do now? What would people think? Over the following weeks, as Caleb learned to navigate the world from a wheelchair, Saffron's visits became shorter, her smiles more forced. She'd arrive late, leave early, always with some excuse about the baby or a friend's emergency. The day he was discharged, she couldn't even look at him as the orderlies helped him into the car. Their Princeton penthouse, once a symbol of their success, became a prison. Everything was wrong. Counters too high, doorways too narrow, stairs leading to their bedroom like a mountain he'd never climb again. Saffron hired contractors to install ramps and modify bathrooms, but her resentment grew with every adaptation. This isn't what I signed up for, she said one morning, bouncing Emma on her hip while Caleb struggled to reach the coffee maker. I married a winner, Caleb. Not. She gestured at his wheelchair with disgust. The final break came on a Tuesday in December. Emma was teething, crying inconsolably while Saffron paced the living room in her yoga outfit, phone pressed to her ear. I can't do lunch today, she was saying to whoever was on the other end. I'm stuck here playing nurse to my husband and his screaming kid. His screaming kid. Not our daughter. His burden. That evening, after Emma finally fell asleep, Saffron stood in their bedroom doorway with 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases. Her diamond wedding ring sat on the nightstand like a discarded receipt. I found someone else, she said without preamble. Someone who can give me the life I deserve. Sterling Martinez. You remember him from Columbia? He's in venture capital now, based in Manhattan. Caleb stared at her, his heart disintegrating. What about Emma? Saffron's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You want to keep her? Fine. One less thing for me to worry about. She walked out without looking back. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Caleb's custom-built home office in Greenwich, Connecticut, where multiple monitors displayed real-time data from offices in 12 countries. Apex Systems had quietly grown into a tech giant worth $8 billion, specializing in AI-driven cybersecurity solutions that governments and Fortune 500 companies couldn't live without. Daddy, you're working too much again, Emma announced from the doorway, her 5-year-old voice carrying the authority of someone much older. She wore her favorite purple dress and held Mr. Bear, her stuffed companion who went everywhere. Caleb spun his wheelchair around, closing the laptop that showed acquisition reports from his latest target, Martinez Capital Management. Sterling's firm was hemorrhaging money, and Caleb had been quietly positioning himself for a hostile takeover for months. You caught me, he said, opening his arms. Emma ran to him, climbing onto his lap with practiced ease. What's the damage report from breakfast? Mrs. Chun made pancakes, but I saved you one. She held up a slightly squished pancake wrapped in a napkin. It's got extra syrup because you looked sad yesterday. Mrs. Chen, their live-in housekeeper and Emma's unofficial grandmother, appeared in the doorway with a knowing smile. She's been watching you, Mr. Vance. Says you get the worry face when you stare at those screens too long. Caleb kissed Emma's forehead. Smart girl. Maybe I should hire her as my business advisor. I already have a job, Emma said seriously. I'm your daughter. That's full-time work. The laugh that escaped him was genuine, the kind that only Emma could produce. She'd become his anchor, his reminder that life was worth fighting for even when everything else had collapsed. Most of his old friends assumed he was struggling financially, living off disability payments in some modest apartment. He'd carefully cultivated that image, letting phone calls go unanswered, avoiding social media, declining the few invitations that still came his way. It was easier to let them think he'd disappeared into irrelevance than to deal with their pity or their sudden interest in his money. But Emma was growing up, and she deserved to see her father as more than a broken man hiding from the world. She deserved to see him as the warrior he'd become, not despite the wheelchair, but because of everything he'd overcome. The reunion invitation arrived on a Thursday, forwarded from his old Princeton address. Eastern Regional High School, class of 2005, 20-year reunion. The Borgata Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. Black tie optional. Emma found him staring at it that evening, her small fingers tracing the embossed letters. "What's this, Daddy?" "An invitation to see some old friends," he said carefully. "People I went to school with a long time ago. Are they nice friends?" Caleb thought about the group that used to follow him around like disciples when he was the star quarterback, the ones who'd stopped calling after the accident. Some of them used to be. Emma studied his face with the intense concentration she usually reserved for coloring books. "You should go." "Should I? Why's that?" "Because you're a hero, Daddy. Heroes don't hide from anyone." Her words hit him like a physical blow. When had he started hiding? When had he let fear disguise itself as strategic withdrawal? "What if they don't think I'm a hero anymore?" he asked quietly. Emma's expression turned fierce, the same look she got when defending Mr. Bear from imaginary monsters. "Then they're stupid, and stupid people don't matter." Mrs. Chun appeared with evening tea, but she'd clearly been listening. "The little one speaks wisdom, Mr. Vance. Perhaps it's time to show the world who you really are." That night, after Emma fell asleep, Caleb sat in his office reviewing financial reports on Martinez Capital Management. Sterling's firm was weeks away from collapse, bleeding clients and hemorrhaging capital. A few strategic moves, and Caleb could acquire the company for pennies on the dollar. But more than revenge, Emma's words echoed in his mind. Heroes don't hide. Maybe it was time for Caleb Vance to step back into the light. The Borgata's valet parking attendant tried to hide his surprise when the modified Tesla pulled up and the wheelchair lift descended. Caleb had chosen his outfit carefully. A midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, custom-tailored to perfection, with a Patek Philippe watch that caught the light like liquid silver. He wasn't the broken man they expected. He was a predator in formal wear. The reunion was already in full swing when he entered the grand ballroom. The conversation dimmed as heads turned, whispers spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Some faces showed genuine surprise, others poorly concealed pity. Most just stared with the morbid curiosity reserved for car accidents and celebrity scandals. "Holy shit, is that Caleb Vance?" Tommy Rodriguez approached first, his smile too wide, his eyes too bright. He'd put on 50 pounds since high school and reeked of cologne and desperation. "Tommy," Caleb said, extending his hand. "Good to see you. Man, we heard about your situation. Tough break." Tommy's eyes darted to the wheelchair, then away. "But hey, you look good. Really good. Considering. The word hung between them like a landmine. "Thanks. How's the insurance business treating you?" Tommy puffed up with pride. "Can't complain. Just bought a new boat, actually. 30-footer. You should come out sometime, assuming—" He caught himself before finishing the thought. "Assuming I can navigate a boat from a wheelchair," Caleb thought. But he just smiled and nodded. More familiar faces gathered around. Mike Chun, the former class president who now sold luxury cars. Jessica Walsh, who'd married 3 times and divorced twice. David Park, who'd inherited his father's restaurant chain and turned it into a minor empire. Asked what he'd been doing for work. He was a curiosity, a reminder, 6'3", perfectly groomed, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. And on his arm, like a trophy wife from Central Casting, was Saffron. She wore a yellow dress that seemed to glow under the ballroom lights, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves, her smile bright and practiced. Diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head, acknowledging greetings from their former classmates with the gracious nod of someone accustomed to worship. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful. But now there was something harder about her, something calculating in the way her eyes swept the room, cataloging who mattered and who didn't. Her gaze found Caleb across the room and stopped. For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing something raw and ugly underneath. Then the smile returned, brighter than before. "Oh my God," she said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Is that Caleb?" She approached with Sterling in tow, her heels clicking against the marble floor like countdown timer. The crowd parted before them, sensing drama. "Caleb Vance," she said, her voice dripping with theatrical sympathy. "Look at you." He met her eyes steadily. "Hello, Saffron." "Sterling." Sterling extended his hand with the confident grip of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Good to see you again, man. Heard you've been keeping busy." "Something like that," Caleb replied. Saffron's smile turned sharp. "We should catch up sometime. I'd love to hear what you've been up to." She tilted her head in mock concern. "Are you managing okay? Financially, I mean. I know things must be challenging." The words were sweet, but the intent was venom. She wanted him to admit defeat, to confirm that leaving him had been the smart choice. "We get by," Caleb said simply. "Well, if you ever need anything." She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, holding it out like she was feeding a stray dog. "For Emma's school shoes or whatever. Children grow so fast." The conversation around them died. 20 pairs of eyes watched to see how he'd respond to this public humiliation. Caleb looked at the money, then at Saffron's expectant face, then at the crowd of former friends who'd remained silent while she tried to destroy what was left of his dignity. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, checking a message that had just come through. The final confirmation from his legal team. The hostile takeover of Martinez Capital Management was complete. Sterling Martinez no longer owned his own company. He did. Caleb looked up at Saffron, her $100 bill still extended like an offering, and smiled for the first time all evening. "Keep your money, Saffron. Something tells me you're going to need it." The rest of the cocktail hour passed in a blur of careful conversations and calculating glances. Caleb positioned himself near the bar, accepting drinks he didn't want while his phone buzzed with updates from his legal team. Each message was another nail in Sterling's financial coffin. Martinez Capital's largest client just pulled out. SEC filing complete. Acquisition is public record as of 6:47 p.m. Sterling's personal accounts frozen pending investigation. Federal warrant approved. Caleb's fingers moved across the screen with surgical precision, authorizing transfers, confirming documentation, orchestrating the systematic destruction of a man's empire. Around him, his former classmates laughed and reminisced about simpler times, oblivious to the financial warfare being conducted in their midst. Tommy Rodriguez sidled up to him, whiskey heavy on his breath. "Man, you're popular tonight. That phone's been buzzing nonstop." "Work never sleeps," Caleb replied, pocketing the device. "What kind of work, if you don't mind me asking?" Tommy's curiosity was genuine, tinged with the desperate hope that maybe his old friend wasn't as broken as everyone assumed. Caleb met his eyes. The kind that pays well. Across the room, Saffron held court at a high-top table surrounded by admirers. She gestured animatedly as she spoke, her yellow dress catching the light, her laughter carrying over the ambient noise like wind chimes. Sterling stood beside her, one hand possessively on her lower back, the other holding a crystal tumbler of aged scotch. Neither of them checked their phones. Neither of them had any idea that their world was collapsing in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The reunion coordinator, a woman named Beth who'd been class treasurer and took her organizational duties seriously even 20 years later, tapped a knife against her champagne flute. The crowd quieted, turning toward the small stage where a microphone waited. We have a wonderful tradition at our reunions where classmates share their memories and achievements. Tonight, we're honored to hear from some very special people. The first few speeches were predictable. Career updates disguised as nostalgia, humble brags wrapped in self-deprecating humor. Mike Chun talked about expanding his car dealership. Jessica Walsh shared photos of her twins. David Park announced his restaurant chain's IPO. Then Saffron stepped onto the stage. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world, her smile radiant under the spotlights. The microphone squealed briefly as she adjusted it to her height. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice warm and melodious. "For those who might not remember me, I'm Saffron Martinez now." She gestured towards Sterling, who raised his glass in acknowledgement. "I wanted to share something tonight about the importance of making hard choices." Caleb's blood chilled. He knew that tone, that setup. She was building to something. 5 years ago, I was married to someone from our class. Someone who, through no fault of his own, became limited, disabled. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And I had a choice to make. Stay and become a caregiver, or choose a life where I could truly thrive. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in understanding, others looked uncomfortable. Caleb felt their eyes finding him in the darkness beyond the stage lights. "I chose myself," Saffron continued. "I chose happiness over obligation, success over sympathy. And tonight, I want to thank someone who taught me that lesson." She reached beneath the podium and produced a plastic bucket filled with ice water. "Caleb Vance, wherever you are in this room, this is for you. Thank you for showing me what I didn't want to become." The crowd parted as she descended from the stage, bucket in hand, her smile sharp as a scalpel. Conversations died. Phones appeared, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Caleb sat perfectly still as she approached, the bucket held high like a ceremonial offering. Ice clinked against plastic with each step. "This," she announced to the watching crowd, "is called the Ice Bucket Challenge. But instead of charity, this is for clarity." She raised the bucket above his head. Caleb looked up at her, his expression calm. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, 7:23 p.m. "Timing is everything," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. The ice water cascaded over him like a waterfall, soaking his custom tuxedo, plastering his hair to his skull, turning his $1,000 watch into a dripping monument to humiliation. The crowd gasped collectively, some laughing nervously, others reaching for their phones to record the spectacle. Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't cry out or curse or grab for towels. He simply sat there, water dripping from his chin, and smiled. "Feel better?" he asked quietly. Saffron's triumph flickered. Something in his calm reaction unsettled her, like she'd expected screaming and gotten silence instead. The ballroom doors burst open with the authority of federal law enforcement. Federal agents. "Nobody move." 6 men and women in dark suits swept into the room, badges visible, hands near their weapons. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by confusion and growing panic. "Sterling Martinez." The lead agent's voice cut through the chaos. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Sterling's scotch glass shattered against the marble floor. His face went from confident tan to sickly pale in seconds. "There's been some mistake," he stammered, but his voice carried no conviction. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked with metallic finality. Sterling's eyes found Saffron across the room, desperate and pleading. "Ma'am." Another agent approached Saffron, who stood frozen in shock, the empty bucket still in her hands. "Saffron Martinez? We need you to remove all jewelry and accessories. They're being seized as proceeds of criminal activity pending investigation." "What? No, these are mine. These were gifts. But her fingers were already trembling as she removed her diamond earrings, her tennis bracelet, her wedding ring, the Cartier watch Sterling had given her for their anniversary, the emerald necklace from their honeymoon in Monaco. Piece by piece, her identity as a wealthy man's wife was stripped away and dropped into evidence bags. "This is insane!" she screamed, turning to the crowd of former classmates who watched in stunned silence. "Somebody help me. Call someone. This can't be legal." But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stared at the spectacle of her destruction. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent continued reading Sterling his Miranda rights as they prepared to lead him away. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Saffron's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for someone to intervene, for anyone to care that her world was collapsing. Her gaze landed on Caleb, still sitting in his wheelchair, still soaking wet, still smiling that quiet smile. "You," she breathed, realization dawning like sunrise. "You did this." Caleb reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket he'd been checking all evening, and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He offered it to her with the same gesture she'd offered him the $100 bill. Then he placed his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair and stood up. The room gasped collectively, a sound like air being sucked from the atmosphere. Conversations that had been whispered died completely. Camera phones that had been recording suddenly felt heavy in their owner's hands. Caleb Vance, broken, pitted, wheelchair-bound Caleb Vance, stood tall and straight, his shoulders square, his spine unbending. Water still dripped from his hair, but he looked like a king rising from his throne. "Physical therapy is remarkable these days," he said conversationally, his voice carrying easily through the silent ballroom. 8 hours a day for 4 years. Expensive, but worth every penny. He took a step toward Saffron, then another. His movement was careful but confident, like someone who'd spent years relearning how to command his own body. "The wheelchair," he continued, "was always a choice, easier to move through airports, comfortable for long days at the office. But mostly, it kept people's expectations low." He stopped in front of his ex-wife, who stood frozen in shock, mascara beginning to track down her cheeks. "You always said you hated having a burden in your life, Saffron." He held out the handkerchief again. "Congratulations. Now you are one." Sterling was led away in handcuffs, his protests echoing off marble walls. The federal agents filed out efficiently, their work complete. The reunion guests remained motionless, uncertain whether they'd witnessed justice or destruction. Saffron stared at the handkerchief in Caleb's outstretched hand, her breath coming in short gasps. "How?" she whispered. "How what? How did I learn to walk again? How did I acquire your husband's company? How did I coordinate with federal investigators to expose the Ponzi scheme he was running?" Caleb's smile never wavered. "Which part specifically?" She took the handkerchief with shaking fingers, dabbing at her ruined makeup. "All of it. The same way I learned to walk again," he said simply. "One step at a time. One day at a time. One choice at a time." He turned to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd clawed his way back from hell. "Sterling Martinez has been stealing from pension funds and charity endowments for 3 years. The FBI investigation started 6 months ago, but the evidence was provided by Apex Systems, my company, as part of our due diligence before acquiring Martinez Capital Management." Stunned silence greeted this revelation. "Apex Systems?" Tommy Rodriguez found his voice first. "You mean the tech company? The one that's worth $8.7 billion as of market close today," Caleb confirmed. "Give or take a few million." He looked around the room at faces he'd known since childhood, people who'd assumed his life had ended in that hospital bed 5 years ago. "I want to thank you all for a lovely evening. The memories will last a lifetime." He walked toward the exit, each step steady and sure. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Oh, and Saffron? Emma asks about you sometimes. I tell her you're doing exactly what you always wanted, living for yourself. The drive back to Greenwich took 2 hours through light traffic and heavy thoughts. Caleb kept the radio off, processing the evening in silence while his Tesla navigated the familiar roads. Emma was asleep when he arrived home, but Mrs. Chun waited in the living room with tea and questions in her eyes. "How did it go, Mr. Vance?" Caleb loosened his still damp bow tie and sank into his favorite chair, the regular one, not the wheelchair that sat folded in the corner like a discarded costume. "About as well as I expected," he said. "Maybe better." Mrs. Chun nodded knowingly. She'd been with them for 3 years and understood more than she ever said. "Emma will want to hear everything tomorrow. She's been practicing her proud daughter face in the mirror." That pulled a genuine laugh from him. "She's perfect exactly as she is." "Yes, she is, and so are you." The next morning brought news reports about Sterling's arrest, speculation about Apex Systems' involvement, and a flood of interview requests that Caleb's assistant politely declined. He had more important things to do. "Daddy!" Emma burst into his office wearing her school uniform and a smile bright enough to power the state. "Mrs. Chun said you were a hero last night. Did you save someone?" Caleb pulled her onto his lap. His regular chair, not the wheelchair that had served its purpose and been retired to the garage. "I saved myself," he said simply, "and maybe taught some people that being broken doesn't mean being beaten. Are you going to tell me the story? Someday when you're older." Emma studied his face with that serious expression she'd inherited from him. "Will you tell me about Mommy too?" The question caught him off guard, but not painfully. Time had softened those sharp edges. "What do you want to know?" "Why she left us." Caleb considered his answer carefully. Emma deserved truth, but age-appropriate truth. Sometimes people think love means never having to face hard things together. Your mom was one of those people. She loved the idea of our family, but not the reality of it. "That's sad," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Her loss, right?" "Right." His computer chimed with an email from his foundation's director. The paperwork was complete. Eastern Regional High School had been purchased and would be converted into a specialized learning center for children with disabilities. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now owned the building where he'd first met Saffron, where their love story had begun 25 years ago. "What are you reading?" Emma asked, peering at the screen. "Information about a new school we're going to build. A place where kids who are different can learn that different doesn't mean less than. Like you. Like me. Like anyone who's ever been told they can't do something because of how they look or how they move or what they need to succeed." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "You know what I think, Daddy?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "I think you're the strongest man in the whole world. Not because you can walk or because you're rich or because you beat the bad guys." She pulled back to look him in the eyes. "Because you never stopped loving me, even when everything was hard." In that moment, Caleb Vance, tech billionaire, corporate raider, the man who'd orchestrated one of the most spectacular takedowns in recent business history, felt like the richest person alive. Not because of the money in his accounts or the companies under his control or the justice he'd served to those who'd wronged him, but because a 5-year-old girl with his eyes and his stubborn chin thought he hung the moon. Outside his office window, Connecticut stretched green and peaceful under morning sunshine. Somewhere in Manhattan, Saffron was probably meeting with bankruptcy lawyers. Somewhere else, Sterling was learning about federal prison cuisine. But here, in this moment, surrounded by everything that truly mattered, Caleb finally understood what victory really looked like. It wasn't about standing up or sitting down. It was about never giving up. And he never would.